The village boy who would change a nation. In the dusty village of Kera, nestled in the western regions of Burkina Faso, a baby boy was born on March 14, 1988, who would one day capture the attention of the entire world. Ibrahim Traoré entered this world in Bondoukoui, a small town that served as a stopping point for travelers moving between Burkina Faso's major cities. His birthplace was modest, surrounded by the golden savanna that stretched endlessly under the African sun. The Traoré family lived simply, like most families in rural Burkina Faso. They were not wealthy by any measure, but they possessed something far more valuable than money: a deep sense of community, resilience, and hope for their children's future. Ibrahim's parents understood that education would be their son's pathway out of poverty and into a better life. As a young child, Ibrahim was notably different from his peers. While other children played in the dusty streets, he would often be found sitting quietly, observing the world around him with intense curiosity. His teachers in primary school quickly noticed his exceptional intelligence and hunger for knowledge. Even in those early years, there was something special about the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that suggested he was destined for something greater. The journey from Bondoukoui to secondary school in Bobo Dioulasso marked Ibrahim's first real step into the wider world. Bobo Dioulasso, Burkina Faso's second-largest city, was a bustling commercial center that opened young Ibrahim's eyes to possibilities he had never imagined. Here, he encountered students from different backgrounds, teachers with diverse perspectives, and ideas that challenged his understanding of the world. During his high school years, Ibrahim's classmates remember him as exceptionally quiet but remarkably talented. He possessed an analytical mind that could grasp complex concepts quickly, whether in mathematics, sciences, or social studies. His teachers often praised his ability to think critically about problems and propose innovative solutions. Yet despite his academic brilliance, Ibrahim remained humble and approachable, never allowing his intelligence to create barriers between himself and others. It was during these formative years in Bobo Dioulasso that Ibrahim first began to understand the challenges facing his country. Burkina Faso, despite its rich cultural heritage and natural resources, struggled with poverty, limited opportunities for its youth, and growing security concerns. These observations planted seeds in young Ibrahim's mind, seeds that would later grow into a powerful vision for his nation's future. When Ibrahim completed his secondary education with outstanding results, he made a decision that would shape his entire future. Instead of seeking opportunities abroad like many of his accomplished peers, he chose to stay in Burkina Faso and pursue higher education at the University of Ouagadougou. This choice reflected his deep love for his homeland and his desire to contribute to its development from within. The University of Ouagadougou opened new intellectual horizons for Ibrahim. He chose to study geology, a field that would give him deep understanding of his country's natural resources and mineral wealth. This academic choice was strategic. Ibrahim recognized that understanding Burkina Faso's geological treasures would be crucial for anyone serious about the nation's economic development. During his university years from 2006 onwards, Ibrahim became increasingly involved in student organizations. He joined the Association of Muslim Students, where he connected with peers who shared his faith and values. More significantly, he became active in the National Association of Students of Burkina Faso, a Marxist-oriented organization that challenged students to think critically about social justice, economic inequality, and political systems. Within the student association, Ibrahim's leadership qualities began to shine. His fellow students elected him as a delegate, recognizing his ability to articulate their concerns and defend their interests in disputes with university administration. Colleagues remember him as someone who never backed down when fighting for what he believed was right, yet he approached conflicts with intelligence and diplomacy rather than aggression. Ibrahim's academic performance remained exceptional throughout his university years. He graduated with honors in 2009, earning a bachelor's degree in science and geology. His professors recognized him as one of their most promising graduates, someone who possessed both theoretical knowledge and practical wisdom. Many expected him to pursue advanced studies or seek lucrative positions in the mining industry. However, Ibrahim had different plans. The young geology graduate looked at his country and saw growing instability, increasing terrorist threats, and young people like himself who felt disconnected from their government. He witnessed how external forces seemed to have more influence over Burkina Faso's destiny than its own citizens. These observations convinced Ibrahim that his country needed defenders who understood both its challenges and its potential. The decision to join the Burkina Faso Armed Forces in 2009 surprised many who knew Ibrahim as a brilliant academic. Friends and family questioned why someone with his educational credentials would choose military service over a potentially lucrative career in geology or mining. Ibrahim's response was simple but profound. His country needed educated, committed, young people willing to serve and protect it from all threats, both external and internal. Ibrahim's entry into military service marked the beginning of a journey that would eventually lead him to the highest office in his nation. At the Georges Namoano Military Academy, he approached military training with the same dedication and intelligence he had brought to his academic studies. His instructors noted his exceptional ability to understand complex military strategies, his natural leadership capabilities, and his genuine concern for the welfare of his fellow soldiers. The young geology graduate turned soldier was about to embark on a path that would test his courage, challenge his convictions, and ultimately position him to lead a transformation that would change not just Burkina Faso, but influence the entire West African region. His story was just beginning, and the world would soon learn the name Ibrahim Traoré. From soldier to warrior, the transformation from university graduate to military officer required Ibrahim to adapt to an entirely different world. At the Georges Namoano Military Academy, he found himself surrounded by young men from diverse backgrounds, all united by their commitment to serve Burkina Faso. The rigorous training challenged every aspect of his being, physical, mental, and emotional. Ibrahim's academic background gave him advantages that his instructors quickly recognized. His understanding of geology proved invaluable when studying terrain analysis and strategic positioning. His analytical thinking skills, honed during years of academic study, helped him excel in military strategy courses. Most importantly, his natural leadership abilities and genuine concern for others made him popular among his fellow cadets. The military training was intense and demanding. Long days began before sunrise with physical conditioning, followed by weapons training, tactical exercises, and classroom instruction. Ibrahim embraced every challenge with characteristic determination. His fellow soldiers remember him as someone who never complained about difficulties, but instead looked for ways to help others overcome their struggles. During his time at the academy, Ibrahim also received advanced military training abroad. The young officer traveled to Morocco and France, where he gained exposure to different military doctrines, advanced technologies, and international perspectives on security challenges. These experiences broadened his understanding of global military affairs and gave him insights into how other nations approach defense and security issues. The international training proved particularly valuable as Ibrahim learned about counterterrorism strategies, peacekeeping operations, and modern military technologies. He studied successful military campaigns from around the world and began developing his own philosophies about effective leadership and military strategy. His instructors noted his exceptional ability to synthesize information from different sources and apply lessons learned to Burkina Faso's specific security challenges. Upon completing his military training, Ibrahim was assigned to active duty in northern Burkina Faso, where his country faced its greatest security challenges. The Sahel region had become increasingly dangerous due to the presence of various terrorist groups and criminal organizations. For Ibrahim, this assignment represented his first real test as a military officer and his opportunity to serve his country in its time of greatest need. The northern regions of Burkina Faso presented Ibrahim with realities that no amount of training could fully prepare him for. He witnessed firsthand the devastating impact of terrorism on innocent civilians. Villages were attacked, families were displaced, and economic development came to a standstill in areas where security could not be guaranteed. These experiences deepened Ibrahim's understanding of his country's challenges and strengthened his resolve to find solutions. As a junior officer, Ibrahim quickly distinguished himself through his tactical intelligence, personal courage, and genuine concern for both his soldiers and the civilian population they were protecting. He developed a reputation for leading from the front, never asking his soldiers to take risks that he himself would not face. This leadership style earned him tremendous respect from those under his command. Ibrahim's approach to counter-terrorism operations was notably different from some of his colleagues. While maintaining necessary security measures, he emphasized the importance of winning the trust and support of local communities. He understood that effective counter-terrorism required not just military force but also addressing the underlying social and economic conditions that made communities vulnerable to extremist recruitment. The young officer's tactical innovations and leadership success led to his selection for international peacekeeping duties. In 2019, Ibrahim was deployed to Mali as part of the United Nations peacekeeping mission known as MINUSMA. This assignment represented a significant honor and demonstrated the confidence his superiors had in his abilities. The deployment to Mali exposed Ibrahim to even more complex security challenges and gave him experience working with international military forces. He served in and around Timbuktu, one of Mali's most historically significant cities, which had been severely damaged by terrorist occupation and required careful peacekeeping efforts to stabilize. During his time with MINUSMA, Ibrahim gained valuable experience in multinational military operations, diplomatic coordination, and post-conflict reconstruction efforts. He worked alongside peacekeepers from many different countries, learning various approaches to peacekeeping and conflict resolution. These experiences gave him a broader perspective on regional security challenges and potential solutions. The international peacekeeping experience also strengthened Ibrahim's conviction that African problems required African solutions. While he appreciated the support of international partners, he became increasingly convinced that lasting stability in the Sahel region would only come when African nations took primary responsibility for their own security and development. Upon returning to Burkina Faso from his peacekeeping deployment, Ibrahim was promoted to captain in 2020 at the remarkably young age of 32. This promotion reflected not only his personal achievements but also the respect he had earned from colleagues and superiors. The promotion also came with increased responsibilities and leadership opportunities. As a captain, Ibrahim was assigned to lead an artillery regiment in the north-central region of Burkina Faso, one of the areas most severely affected by terrorist activities. This position required him to coordinate complex military operations, while also working closely with civilian authorities to support development and reconstruction efforts in areas that had been cleared of terrorist presence. The years of frontline military service had transformed Ibrahim from an idealistic young geology graduate into a seasoned military professional. He had witnessed the worst of what terrorism could do to innocent people, but he had also seen the incredible resilience of Burkina Faso's citizens and the dedication of his fellow soldiers. These experiences shaped his understanding of leadership and his vision for his country's future. By 2020, Captain Ibrahim Traoré had established himself as one of Burkina Faso's most promising young military officers. His combination of academic intelligence, tactical skill, international experience, and genuine leadership abilities made him stand out among his peers. However, he was also becoming increasingly concerned about his country's political direction and the effectiveness of its response to the security challenges facing the nation. The stage was being set for Ibrahim to play a much larger role in Burkina Faso's future. His years of military service had given him deep insights into the country's problems, extensive experience in finding solutions, and the respect of both soldiers and civilians. Little did anyone realize that this accomplished young captain was about to become one of the most significant political figures in West Africa. The journey from village boy to university, graduate to military officer had prepared Ibrahim for challenges that lay ahead. His story was about to take a dramatic turn that would change not only his own life, but the destiny of his entire nation. The making of a revolutionary. By early 2022, Burkina Faso had reached a breaking point. The security situation that Captain Ibrahim Traoré and his fellow soldiers had been fighting to control for years was deteriorating rapidly. Terrorist attacks were increasing in frequency and boldness, claiming hundreds of lives and displacing thousands of families. The civilian government under President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore seemed unable to develop effective strategies to address the crisis. Ibrahim watched with growing frustration as political leaders in the capital appeared disconnected from the reality of what was happening in the field. While he and his soldiers risked their lives daily to protect civilians, they often lacked adequate equipment, sufficient support, and clear strategic direction from their commanders. The gap between political promises and military realities was becoming impossible to ignore. The breaking point came when a devastating attack resulted in significant military and civilian casualties. Ibrahim and many of his fellow officers felt that their sacrifices were being wasted due to inadequate political leadership and strategic direction. The anger and frustration that had been building for years finally reached a boiling point among the military ranks. Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba emerged as the leader of officers who decided that military intervention was necessary to save the country. In January 2022, Damiba and his supporters overthrew President Kabore's government, establishing the Patriotic Movement for Safeguard and Restoration to lead the country through a transitional period. Ibrahim supported Damiba's coup, believing that military leadership might be more effective at addressing the security crisis than the civilian government had been. As an experienced combat officer with proven leadership abilities, Ibrahim was integrated into the new transitional government structure. His knowledge of counter-terrorism operations and his reputation among troops made him a valuable asset to the new leadership. Following the successful coup, Ibrahim was assigned to lead operations in some of Burkina Faso's most challenging regions. Damiba recognized Ibrahim's tactical expertise and leadership abilities, giving him significant responsibilities in coordinating military responses to terrorist threats. This period allowed Ibrahim to implement some of his own strategic ideas about how to approach the security challenges facing the country. However, as months passed under Damiba's leadership, Ibrahim began to notice that many of the same problems that had plagued the previous government were continuing under military rule. Despite promises of improved security and more effective governance, the situation on the ground was not improving significantly. Terrorist attacks continued, military casualties mounted, and civilian suffering persisted. Ibrahim's frustration with the new leadership grew as he observed what he considered to be strategic mistakes and missed opportunities. He believed that Damiba and his inner circle were not taking sufficiently bold action to address the root causes of the security crisis. More concerning to Ibrahim was his perception that the new leadership was becoming too comfortable with power and losing focus on the urgent mission of restoring security and stability. The tension between Ibrahim and the established leadership came to a head following a particularly devastating attack that resulted in the deaths of 11 soldiers and dozens of civilians. Ibrahim and many of his fellow officers felt that this tragedy could have been prevented with better strategic planning, adequate resources, and more aggressive tactics against terrorist groups. In the aftermath of this attack, Ibrahim began quietly organizing with other junior officers who shared his frustrations with the current leadership. These were not ambitious men seeking power for personal gain, but dedicated soldiers who felt that their country's survival was at stake and that more decisive action was needed to address the crisis. To the group of officers that gathered around, Ibrahim represented some of Burkina Faso's most experienced and respected military leaders. They had all served on the front lines of the fight against terrorism, had witnessed the suffering of their fellow citizens, and had lost colleagues in the struggle. Their motivation was not political ambition, but genuine concern for their country's future. Ibrahim's leadership of this group was natural and unforced. His colleagues respected his tactical expertise, his personal courage, and his genuine commitment to the welfare of both soldiers and civilians. Unlike some military coups that are driven by personal ambition or ethnic divisions, the movement that formed around Ibrahim was united by shared professional concerns and patriotic motivations. The planning for what would become known as the September 2022 coup was careful and methodical. Ibrahim and his colleagues were not interested in creating chaos or instability, but rather in implementing more effective leadership to address the country's security challenges. They spent weeks analyzing the current situation, developing strategic alternatives, and building support among key military units. On September 30th, 2022, Ibrahim and his fellow officers moved decisively to remove Damiba from power. The operation was swift and well coordinated, demonstrating the careful planning that had gone into the effort. Within hours, they had gained control of key government facilities and communication centers, effectively ending Damiba's rule. Ibrahim's first public statement as the leader of the new military government was notable for its clarity and focus. Rather than making grandiose promises or attacking his predecessors, he outlined specific concerns about the security situation and committed to taking more effective action to protect Burkina Faso's citizens. His tone was serious but not threatening, confident but not arrogant. At age 34, Ibrahim Traoré had become the interim president of Burkina Faso and one of the youngest heads of state in the world. The transformation from village boy to university graduate to military officer to national leader had taken just over 3 decades. But each step had prepared him for this moment of ultimate responsibility. The international community watched carefully as Ibrahim assumed power. Some observers expressed concern about another military coup in West Africa, while others noted the specific circumstances that had led to the change in leadership. What was clear to everyone was that Ibrahim represented a new generation of African leadership. Young, educated, experienced, and determined to address the challenges facing the continent, Ibrahim's rise to power was not the result of long-term political ambition, but rather the culmination of years of frustration with ineffective governance in the face of existential threats to his country. His military background, educational foundation, and personal experiences had all contributed to his development as a leader, capable of taking on the enormous challenges facing Burkina Faso. The young captain who had studied geology, served as a peacekeeper, and fought terrorists was now responsible for the future of an entire nation. The next phase of his remarkable journey would test whether his vision, determination, and leadership abilities could translate into effective governance and genuine progress for his people. The world's youngest president takes power on October 6, 2022. Ibrahim Traoré was officially sworn in as the interim president of Burkina Faso, making him the world's youngest head of state at just 34 years old. The ceremony was notably different from typical presidential inaugurations. There were no elaborate celebrations or expensive ceremonies. Instead, Ibrahim chose a simple, dignified event that reflected his serious approach to the enormous challenges facing his country. Ibrahim's first presidential address to the nation was delivered with characteristic directness and clarity. Speaking in both French and local languages, he acknowledged the gravity of the situation Burkina Faso faced and outlined his vision for addressing the multiple crises confronting the country. His tone was serious but optimistic, reflecting his belief that with proper leadership and citizen cooperation, even the most difficult challenges could be overcome. The new president's initial priorities were clear and focused. Security remained the most urgent concern, with terrorist attacks continuing to threaten civilian populations and economic development throughout the country. Ibrahim announced significant changes to military strategy, promising more aggressive action against terrorist groups, while also emphasizing the need to protect innocent civilians caught in the conflict. Ibrahim's approach to governance reflected his military background and academic training. He insisted on detailed briefings, data-driven decision-making, and clear accountability measures for government officials. His cabinet meetings were known for their efficiency and focus, with lengthy debates discouraged in favor of practical action plans and concrete implementation timelines. One of Ibrahim's most significant early decisions was to restructure how Burkina Faso's natural resources were managed and utilized. Drawing on his geology background, he understood that his country's mineral wealth, particularly its gold deposits, could provide the financial resources needed to fund security operations and development projects. However, he was determined that these resources would benefit Burkina Faso's citizens rather than foreign corporations or corrupt officials. The establishment of a state-owned mining company represented a dramatic shift in how Burkina Faso approached its natural resources. Ibrahim personally oversaw the nationalization of several gold mines, ensuring that revenues would flow directly into government coffers rather than to foreign shareholders. This decision generated significant controversy internationally but was popular among Burkina Faso citizens who had long felt that their country's wealth was being exported without benefiting local communities. Ibrahim's economic policies reflected his commitment to self-reliance and independence from what he considered to be exploitative international relationships. He announced that Burkina Faso would no longer export unrefined gold to Europe, instead investing in domestic refining capabilities that would add value to the country's mineral exports and create local employment opportunities. The construction of a national gold refinery became one of Ibrahim's signature projects, symbolizing his vision of economic independence and self-determination. The facility, designed to process 150 tons of gold annually, represented not just an economic investment, but a statement about Burkina Faso's determination to control its own destiny. Ibrahim personally visited the construction site regularly, demonstrating his hands-on approach to governance and his commitment to seeing projects through to completion. Agricultural development also received significant attention under Ibrahim's leadership. Recognizing that most of Burkina Faso's population depended on farming for their livelihoods, he initiated programs to provide modern equipment and technical support to rural communities. The establishment of the National Support Center for Artisanal Cotton Processing aimed to help farmers add value to their crops and increase their incomes. Infrastructure development became another priority for Ibrahim's government. The construction of a new airport and improvements to rural road networks were designed to facilitate economic development and improve connections between different regions of the country. Ibrahim insisted that these projects be completed efficiently and transparently, with regular public updates on progress and expenditures. Ibrahim's leadership style was notably different from many African presidents. He maintained the disciplined, no-nonsense approach he had developed during his military career, focusing on results rather than ceremony or publicity. His public appearances were typically related to specific government programs or security operations, rather than general political rallies or social events. The young president's personal life remained largely private, reflecting his belief that public attention should focus on government policies and achievements rather than personal matters. Unlike many heads of state who frequently appeared with their families at public events, Ibrahim kept his private relationships out of the public eye, maintaining clear boundaries between his personal and professional responsibilities. International relations under Ibrahim's leadership took on new characteristics that reflected his vision of African independence and self-determination. He quickly established close relationships with other young military leaders in West Africa, particularly in Mali and Niger, where similar frustrations with ineffective governance and foreign interference had led to military interventions. The formation of the Alliance of Sahel states with Mali and Niger represented Ibrahim's belief that regional cooperation among like-minded governments could be more effective than traditional international partnerships that often came with conditions and limitations. This alliance allowed the three countries to coordinate security operations, share intelligence, and develop common approaches to economic and social challenges. Ibrahim's relationship with traditional Western partners became increasingly strained as he pursued policies that prioritized Burkina Faso's sovereignty over international expectations. His decision to expel French military forces and reduce cooperation with international organizations reflected his conviction that true independence required breaking free from relationships that he viewed as neo-colonial. The young president's growing international profile was enhanced by his articulate communication style and his ability to present complex issues in accessible terms. His speeches at international forums were noted for their intellectual depth, moral clarity, and passionate advocacy for African self-determination. Even critics acknowledged his exceptional communication abilities and his genuine commitment to his stated principles. Social media played an interesting role in Ibrahim's rise to international prominence. His speeches and statements frequently went viral, particularly among young Africans who saw him as representing their aspirations for leadership that prioritized their interests over international expectations. The phenomenon of AI-generated videos featuring Ibrahim became so widespread that his real statements sometimes had to be distinguished from fabricated content. By the end of his first year in power, Ibrahim had established himself as one of Africa's most influential young leaders. His policies had generated significant controversy and debate, but there was no question about his personal commitment to the vision he articulated or his determination to implement the changes he believed were necessary for his country's future. The transformation from military officer to head of state had been rapid and dramatic, but Ibrahim's fundamental character and commitments remained unchanged. He continued to approach challenges with the same analytical intelligence, personal courage, and dedication to service that had characterized his earlier career. The question now was whether these qualities would be sufficient to address the enormous challenges facing Burkina Faso and achieve the ambitious goals he had set for his presidency. Challenges and controversies of leadership. Leading a nation proved to be far more complex than commanding military units in combat. As Ibrahim settled into his role as president, he discovered that every decision generated consequences that rippled throughout Burkina Faso society and beyond its borders. The idealism and clear-cut objectives that had motivated his rise to power now had to contend with the messy realities of governance, diplomacy, and competing interests. The security challenges that had driven Ibrahim to seek political change remained stubbornly persistent despite his new authorities and resources. Terrorist groups continued to launch attacks against military and civilian targets, adapting their tactics to counter the new strategies implemented by Ibrahim's government. The young president found himself confronting the sobering reality that military solutions alone were insufficient to address the complex factors that had created the security crisis. Ibrahim's response to ongoing security challenges involved controversial decisions that generated significant debate within Burkina Faso and internationally. The establishment of the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland represented his attempt to mobilize civilian support for security operations. But critics raised concerns about the training, oversight, and accountability of civilian militia groups. Reports emerged suggesting that some volunteers were being forced into service rather than genuinely volunteering, creating ethical dilemmas about the program's implementation. The restructuring of Burkina Faso's military forces under Ibrahim's leadership involved significant changes in command structures, resource allocation, and strategic priorities. While these changes were intended to improve effectiveness against terrorist threats, they also created tensions within the military hierarchy and concerns about the concentration of power in the presidency. Some officers who had supported Ibrahim's rise to power began to question whether the promised improvements were materializing as expected. The most serious challenge to Ibrahim's leadership came in September 2023, when elements within the military attempted to overthrow his government. The failed coup attempt revealed the fragility of his position and the continuing divisions within Burkina Faso's armed forces. Ibrahim's response to the coup attempt was swift and decisive, with arrests of suspected participants and reorganization of security arrangements around the presidency. The aftermath of the failed coup attempt saw Ibrahim's government take increasingly authoritarian measures to maintain control and prevent future challenges to its authority. Critics noted restrictions on press freedom, limitations on political activities, and concerns about the treatment of suspected dissidents. These developments raised questions about whether Ibrahim's government was evolving in directions that contradicted the democratic values he had initially promised to protect. Ibrahim's foreign policy decisions continued to generate significant controversy and international attention. His growing relationship with Russia, symbolized by meetings with President Vladimir Putin and increasing cooperation between the two countries, concerned Western governments that had traditionally enjoyed close relationships with Burkina Faso. The young president's embrace of what he described as Russia's anti-imperialist agenda reflected his determination to reduce Western influence in his country's affairs. The decision to withdraw Burkina Faso from the economic community of West African states represented perhaps Ibrahim's most dramatic break with traditional regional relationships. ECOWAS had been pressing for a return to civilian governance and had imposed sanctions to encourage democratic transition. Ibrahim's rejection of these pressures and his formation of the alliance of Sahel states with Mali and Niger created a new dynamic in West African politics that challenged established regional institutions. Economic policies under Ibrahim's leadership generated mixed results that reflected both the ambitions and limitations of his approach to governance. The nationalization of mining assets and the construction of domestic refining facilities demonstrated his commitment to economic independence. But these projects also required significant investments and technical expertise that strained government resources and capabilities. The rejection of financial assistance from international institutions like the International Monetary Fund and World Bank was consistent with Ibrahim's philosophy of self-reliance, but it also limited his government's access to development funding and technical assistance. Critics argued that this approach was ideologically satisfying, but practically counterproductive, while supporters praised Ibrahim's unwillingness to accept conditions that might compromise Burkina Faso's sovereignty. Social policies implemented by Ibrahim's government reflected his commitment to traditional values and his interpretation of what would serve Burkina Faso's interests. The criminalization of homosexuality in 2025 generated international criticism but was supported by many of Ibrahim's domestic supporters who viewed it as consistent with their cultural and religious values. These decisions highlighted the tensions between Ibrahim's international reputation and his domestic political considerations. Press freedom became an increasingly contentious issue under Ibrahim's leadership. The banning of international news organizations like France 24 and Radio France Internationally was justified by his government as necessary to prevent the spread of terrorist propaganda and foreign interference. However, media freedom advocates argued that these restrictions represented dangerous precedents that could lead to broader suppression of independent journalism and political dissent. Despite these controversies, Ibrahim maintained significant popular support, particularly among young people in Burkina Faso and across West Africa. His speeches continued to resonate with audiences who appreciated his articulation of African dignity, self-determination, and resistance to foreign domination. The phenomenon of his growing international celebrity, fueled by social media and sometimes by AI-generated content, demonstrated the power of his message to inspire hope and pride among his supporters. The extension of Ibrahim's mandate through national consultations in 2024 was presented as a response to popular demand for continued leadership during the ongoing security crisis. However, the boycott of these consultations by most political parties raised questions about their legitimacy and representativeness. Critics argued that Ibrahim was becoming increasingly authoritarian, while supporters maintained that stable leadership was essential during national emergency conditions. Ibrahim's personal transformation during his years in power was noted by observers who had known him before his rise to prominence. The quiet, analytical officer had evolved into a confident, sometimes defiant leader who seemed increasingly comfortable with power and resistant to criticism. His adoption of white military uniforms and more formal protocols suggested a growing sense of his own importance and authority. The inner circle around Ibrahim became increasingly important as external pressures and internal challenges mounted. His brothers Inusa and Kassoum played crucial roles in his government, with Inusa serving as an influential special advisor and Kassoum managing propaganda and public mobilization efforts. This reliance on family members reflected both Ibrahim's need for trusted allies and concerns about the concentration of power within a small group. By 2025, 3 years after taking power, Ibrahim Traoré had established himself as one of Africa's most influential and controversial leaders. His supporters viewed him as a courageous champion of African independence, who was willing to challenge international pressure and implement necessary changes despite criticism. His critics saw him as an increasingly authoritarian leader who was concentrating power, suppressing dissent, and failing to deliver on promises of improved governance and security. The reality, as with most complex political situations, lay somewhere between these extreme perspectives. Ibrahim had undeniably brought energy, vision, and determination to Burkina Faso's leadership during a critical period in the country's history. Whether these qualities would ultimately prove sufficient to address the enormous challenges facing his nation remained to be seen. Legacy in the making. As 2025 progressed, Ibrahim Traoré found himself at a crossroads that would define not only his own future, but potentially the future of West Africa itself. The young president who had captured international attention through his dramatic rise to power now faced the more complex challenge of demonstrating that his vision could produce tangible improvements in the lives of Burkina Faso's citizens. The security situation that had initially motivated Ibrahim's political involvement remained the ultimate test of his leadership effectiveness. While some regions had seen improvements in stability and reduced terrorist activity, other areas continued to experience significant challenges. Ibrahim's government had invested heavily in new equipment, training programs, and strategic initiatives, but the complex nature of the threats facing Burkina Faso meant that progress was often incremental and difficult to measure. The economic transformation that Ibrahim had promised was showing mixed results. After 3 years of implementation, the domestic gold refinery had begun operations and was processing significant quantities of precious metals, generating revenue that remained within Burkina Faso rather than flowing to foreign shareholders. However, the broader economic indicators showed limited improvement in employment, poverty reduction, and overall living standards for most citizens. Agricultural initiatives had produced some encouraging results, with improved equipment and technical support, helping many farmers increase their productivity and incomes. The cotton processing facilities were operating successfully and providing new economic opportunities in rural areas. These achievements demonstrated that Ibrahim's vision of economic self-reliance could produce practical benefits, though the scale and pace of change remained subjects of debate. Infrastructure development under Ibrahim's leadership had transformed parts of Burkina Faso's transportation and communication networks. The new airport had become operational and was facilitating increased trade and investment opportunities. Road improvements had connected previously isolated communities to markets and services. These projects represented concrete evidence of government effectiveness and contributed to Ibrahim's popular support. The international community's relationship with Ibrahim's government had stabilized into a pattern of cautious engagement mixed with ongoing concerns about democratic governance and human rights. Western governments that had initially hoped to influence Ibrahim's policies through diplomatic pressure had largely accepted that his administration would pursue its own independent course regardless of external preferences. The alliance of Sahel states had evolved into a significant regional force that challenged traditional power structures in West Africa. The coordination between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger on security matters, trade policies, and diplomatic initiatives had created new dynamics that other regional governments had to acknowledge and work around. Ibrahim's role as one of the alliance's key leaders had enhanced his international stature and provided him with alternatives to traditional partnerships. Ibrahim's relationship with Russia had deepened considerably, providing his government with military equipment, technical assistance, and diplomatic support that reduced dependence on Western partners. The presence of Russian advisors and technicians in Burkina Faso had become more visible, though Ibrahim's government maintained that these relationships were based on mutual respect and shared interests, rather than the dependency that had characterized previous international partnerships. The domestic political landscape in Burkina Faso had been fundamentally altered by Ibrahim's presidency. Traditional political parties had been marginalized or eliminated, while new forms of political organization had emerged around support for the government's vision and programs. The youth-dominated movement that supported Ibrahim represented a significant shift from the older, more traditional political structures that had dominated Burkina Faso for decades. Ibrahim's personal evolution during his years in power had been remarkable to observe. The quiet, analytical military officer had developed into a confident, articulate leader who commanded attention on international stages and inspired passionate loyalty among his supporters. His communication skills had improved dramatically, and his ability to articulate complex political and economic concepts in accessible terms had become one of his greatest political assets. The phenomenon of Ibrahim's international celebrity had continued to grow, fueled by social media, international speaking engagements, and the symbolism he represented for young Africans seeking alternatives to traditional governance models. His speeches at international forums were widely circulated and analyzed, contributing to debates about African independence, economic development, and political leadership that extended far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. However, the concentration of power in Ibrahim's hands had raised concerns among both international observers and some domestic critics about the long-term sustainability of his governance model. The extension of his mandate until 2029 had effectively eliminated the possibility of democratic transition in the near future, leading to questions about whether his administration represented temporary military leadership or a more permanent authoritarian system. The role of Ibrahim's family members in his government had become increasingly prominent and controversial. His brother Inusa's influence as special advisor was widely recognized as extending far beyond his official title, leading some observers to describe him as functioning almost as a deputy president. Kasum's responsibility for propaganda and public mobilization had made him a key figure in maintaining popular support for the government's policies. Security arrangements around Ibrahim had become increasingly elaborate as threats to his leadership had materialized. The failed coup attempt in 2023 had demonstrated the continuing fragility of his position and the need for constant vigilance against internal challenges. The expansion of presidential security services had created new institutions within the government that were directly loyal to Ibrahim personally rather than to broader governmental structures. The question of succession had become increasingly relevant as Ibrahim's mandate was extended and his position became more institutionalized. Unlike traditional military leaders who often struggled to identify and prepare successors, Ibrahim appeared to be building governmental structures that could potentially survive his eventual departure from power. However, the personalized nature of his leadership made it difficult to predict how stable these structures would prove to be without his direct involvement. Economic achievements under Ibrahim's leadership had created a foundation for potential long-term development, but significant challenges remained. The diversification of Burkina Faso's economy beyond traditional agriculture and raw material exports was progressing slowly, and the country remained vulnerable to external economic pressures and internal security challenges that could disrupt development efforts. The social changes that had occurred during Ibrahim's presidency reflected both his government's policies and broader generational shifts within Burkina Faso society. Young people who had grown up during the security crisis and economic difficulties of the early 2000s had embraced Ibrahim's message of self-reliance and national pride, creating a new political culture that was distinctly different from previous generations. As Ibrahim approached the midpoint of his extended mandate, his legacy was still being written. The young geology student who had joined the military to serve his country had succeeded in transforming himself into one of Africa's most influential leaders. Whether this transformation would ultimately benefit Burkina Faso and its citizens remained the central question that would determine how history would judge his remarkable journey from village boy to president. The story of Ibrahim Traoré represented more than just the biography of an individual leader. It embodied the aspirations, frustrations, and possibilities of a generation of young Africans who had grown up during a period of significant challenges, but who refused to accept that their continent's potential could not be realized. His successes and failures would provide lessons for future leaders and citizens who shared his vision of African dignity, independence, and prosperity. The final chapters of Ibrahim's story were still being written, but the impact he had already made on Burkina Faso, West Africa, and the broader African continent was undeniable. From the dusty village where he was born to the presidential palace where he now governed, his journey had demonstrated that even the most unlikely individuals could rise to positions of enormous influence and responsibility when circumstances, preparation, and determination aligned in extraordinary ways.